Marcus Reed wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed the heavy mop bucket down the hallway of Lincoln Community Center. It was nearly midnight and his shift was almost over. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the worn linoleum floors. This had been his routine for the past 3 years, cleaning up after everyone else, making sure the building was ready for another day of serving the neighborhood's families. He didn't mind the work. Honest work never bothered him. What got to him sometimes, late at night when the building was empty and quiet, was the loneliness. At 28 years old, Marcus had grown used to being alone, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. He paused by the bulletin board in the main hallway, looking at the photos pinned there. Smiling families at the summer barbecue, kids holding up art projects, elderly folks playing bingo. Everyone seemed to belong to something, to someone. Marcus had spent his entire life on the outside looking in. His earliest memory was waking up in a hospital bed, his body aching, nurses speaking in hushed voices nearby. He couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. He remembered crying for his mama, remembered the confusion and fear when no one came. For weeks, maybe months, he stayed in that hospital. The details were fuzzy now, buried under years of trying to forget. What came after was clearer, though he sometimes wished it wasn't. Foster homes. So many foster homes. Some were okay. The Johnsons had been kind enough even if they were overwhelmed with 6 other kids. Mrs. Patterson meant well but was too old and tired to really care. The Hendersons. Well, he tried not to think about them. He learned early on not to get attached. Just when he'd start to feel settled, to hope that maybe this time would be different, he'd be moved again. New school, new bedroom, new rules. By the time he aged out of the system at 18, Marcus had lived in 14 different homes. He couldn't remember all their faces anymore, but he remembered the feeling. That constant sense of being temporary, unwanted, disposable. The social workers told him he'd been found with no identification. No one ever came looking for him. He used to imagine that somewhere out there, he had parents who were searching desperately, who'd been separated from him by some terrible mistake. As a kid, he'd pictured his father as a hero, someone who would burst through the door one day and take him home. His mother would hug him and never let go. They'd tell him how hard they'd tried to find him, how much they'd missed him. But the years passed and no one came. Eventually, Marcus stopped waiting. He stopped imagining. The truth was probably much simpler and sadder. He'd been abandoned. Maybe his parents had been addicts or too young to care for a child. Maybe he'd been unwanted from the start. The not knowing was its own kind of torture, but he'd learned to live with it. After aging out of foster care, Marcus struggled. He worked whatever jobs he could find, fast food, warehouse work, construction. He slept on friends' couches when he could, in his beat-up car when he couldn't. There were dark times, moments when he wondered if life was worth the constant fight. But something in him refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was hope, buried so deep he barely recognized it anymore. The community center job had been a turning point. It wasn't glamorous and the pay barely covered rent on his tiny studio apartment, but it was steady. And for the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he was part of something. The people here, the staff, the volunteers, the families who came through the doors, they treated him with respect. They learned his name. They asked how he was doing and actually waited for an answer. Mr. Chen, who ran the after-school program, always saved him a plate when they had special events. "You work too hard on an empty stomach," he'd say, pressing a container of homemade dumplings into Marcus's hands. Maria, the receptionist, brought him coffee every morning, fixed just the way he liked it. These small kindnesses meant more to Marcus than anyone could know. Still, he kept people at arm's length. It was safer that way. He'd learned that lesson over and over. Don't get too close, don't expect too much, don't let yourself need anyone. He was friendly but never shared much about his past. When coworkers invited him out after work, he usually declined. When Maria's sister tried to set him up on a date, he politely refused. It wasn't that he didn't want connection. He was just afraid of what would happen when people really got to know him, when they saw how damaged he was underneath. Late at night, alone in his apartment, Marcus sometimes let himself wonder about the life he might have had. What if things had been different? What if his parents had kept him? Who would he have become? Would he have gone to college, had a career, a family of his own? The alternate versions of his life felt like ghosts haunting him. showing him everything he'd lost without ever knowing he'd had it. He'd started taking online classes at the public library, studying business administration. It was slow going. He could only afford one class at a time, and he was years behind where he should be. But it gave him something to work toward, a future that might be different from his past. Mr. Chen encouraged him, told him he was smart enough to do anything he set his mind to. Marcus wanted to believe him. As he finished mopping and locked up the supply closet, Marcus felt the familiar ache in his left knee. It had been bothering him more lately, especially after long shifts. He'd injured it years ago in a fall and never got it properly treated. The free clinic had given him some pain medication, but the doctor said he really needed to see a specialist. That required insurance he didn't have and money he couldn't spare. He'd deal with it. He always did. Marcus had learned to endure, to push through pain and keep going. What other choice did he have? Walking out into the cool night air, Marcus looked up at the stars barely visible through the city's light pollution. Somewhere up there, maybe his parents were looking at the same sky, or maybe they were gone and he really was alone in the world. Either way, he'd survived this long. He'd keep surviving. But deep down in a place he rarely let himself acknowledge, Marcus still carried that little boy's hope. The one who believed that someday, somehow, someone would come for him. Someone would see him, really see him, and decide he was worth keeping. He didn't know that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. He didn't know that fate was already in motion, bringing together the pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for 25 years. And he certainly didn't know that the kindest person he'd ever meet was about to walk into his life and change everything. For now, Marcus Reed was just a maintenance worker heading home after a long shift, carrying his loneliness like a familiar weight, unaware that tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of his old life and the start of something he'd stopped letting himself dream about. Sarah Chen had been a nurse for 6 years, but she still couldn't get used to the suffering. Every shift at City General Hospital brought new heartbreak. Patients who couldn't afford their medications, families torn apart by illness, people slipping through the cracks of a broken system. But giving up wasn't in her nature. If anything, the hardship made her work harder, care deeper, try to be the light in someone's darkest moment. Her co-workers sometimes joked that she had a savior complex. Maybe they were right. But Sarah had her reasons for being the way she was. She'd grown up watching her mother clean houses to support the family after her father left. Her mom never complained, never showed bitterness, just worked herself to exhaustion to give Sarah and her brother a better life. When Sarah was 15, her mother collapsed at work. Undiagnosed diabetes that had gone untreated because she couldn't afford to miss work for doctor's appointments. They'd almost lost her. That experience shaped everything Sarah became. She put herself through nursing school, working 3 jobs, determined to help people like her mother who were too busy surviving to take care of themselves. She specialized in community health, choosing to work in underfunded clinics and hospitals that served the city's poorest neighborhoods. Her nursing school friends went on to cushy jobs in private hospitals or specialty practices. Sarah chose the hard road. It was never about the money for her. She lived simply in a small apartment she shared with her brother David, who was working his way through community college. Most of her paycheck went to bills and helping her mom, who still worked too hard despite Sarah's protests. Whatever was left, Sarah often spent on patients who needed help. She'd learned not to tell her supervisor about that. There had been a lecture about professional boundaries and enabling people, but Sarah couldn't watch a diabetic patient ration insulin or see a mother leave without antibiotics for her sick child. She'd slip them cash or pay the pharmacy herself, pretending it was a hospital program or a charitable donation. Small acts of rebellion against a system that seemed designed to crush the vulnerable. The community center volunteer work had started almost by accident. One of her patients, Mrs. Rodriguez, mentioned that the center was looking for someone to teach a health and wellness class. They couldn't pay much, basically nothing, but they desperately needed someone with medical knowledge to help educate the community about preventive care, nutrition, and managing chronic conditions. Sarah showed up the following week and never stopped. Every Tuesday evening after her hospital shift, she'd head to Lincoln Community Center and spend 2 hours teaching whoever showed up. Sometimes it was just 3 or 4 people. Sometimes the room was packed. She covered everything from managing diabetes to infant care to recognizing signs of depression. She brought free blood pressure cuffs, taught people how to use them, and made herself available for questions. The community embraced her. People started calling her our angel, or the good nurse. It embarrassed Sarah, but it also filled something in her that had been empty. This was why she'd become a nurse, not to work in sterile hospitals following protocols, but to connect with people, to make a real difference in their daily lives. That's how she met Marcus. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 6 months after she'd started at the center. Sarah was setting up for her evening class when she heard a crash from the hallway, followed by a string of muffled curses. She rushed out to find a man on the floor, surrounded by cleaning supplies, clutching his knee. "Are you okay?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth, his face pale with pain. "Just stupid. Lost my balance," but he clearly wasn't fine. Sarah could see his knee was swollen, and the way he was breathing told her he was in significant pain. "I'm a nurse," she said gently. "Let me take a look." The man, Marcus, she'd learned, tried to wave her off, insisting he needed to finish his work. But when he tried to stand, his leg gave out. Sarah caught him, surprised by how much weight he was trying to put on an obviously injured joint. She helped him to the center's small office and examined his knee. It was badly swollen, and when she asked him to describe the pain, the story came out. An old injury that never healed, right? Years of working on his feet making it worse. No insurance to see a specialist. Just over-the-counter pain pills and hoping it would get better on its own. "You need to see a doctor," Sarah said firmly. "This isn't something you can ignore." "Can't afford it," Marcus replied, not meeting her eyes. There was shame in his voice that broke Sarah's heart. She'd heard those words so many times from so many people. The weight of them never got easier to bear. "The free clinic where I used to work has Saturday hours," she said. "No one gets turned away. I can give you the address, maybe even get you an appointment." Marcus looked at her, then really looked at her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same look her mother used to have, that mixture of hope and wariness, like he wanted to believe someone might help but was afraid to trust it. "Why would you do that?" he asked quietly. "Because you need help, and I can help," Sarah said simply. "That's reason enough." That weekend, Sarah personally took Marcus to the clinic. She'd called in a favor to get him seen by Dr. Patel, one of the best orthopedic doctors she knew who volunteered there. The diagnosis wasn't great. He'd need physical therapy and possibly surgery eventually. But they got him a proper brace, better pain management, and a treatment plan he could actually afford. Marcus tried to pay her back over the following weeks. He'd leave coffee on the table before her classes or volunteer to help carry her supplies. She kept telling him it wasn't necessary, but she understood the need. He needed to feel like less of a charity case, like he could give something back. So she let him help, and slowly they became friends. She learned about his past in bits and pieces. He didn't share easily, but Sarah was a patient listener. Late nights after her classes, when Marcus was finishing his shift, they'd sometimes sit in the empty center and talk. He told her about growing up in foster care, about feeling like he didn't belong anywhere, about the family he'd never known. Sarah shared her own story too. Her mother's struggles, her father's abandonment, the fear and helplessness she'd felt watching her mom almost die. She told him why she became a nurse, why she couldn't walk past someone who needed help. "You're one of the good ones," Marcus said one night. "There aren't many people like you in the world." "There are more than you think," Sarah replied. "You just have to look for them. And Marcus, you're one of them too. You might not see it, but I do." He looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment, but Sarah meant every word. She saw how gentle Marcus was with the kids at the center, how he always had time to help someone carry groceries or fix a broken toy. She saw how hard he worked, how he never complained, how he was trying so hard to build something from nothing. Over the months, their friendship deepened. Sarah found herself looking forward to Tuesday evenings, knowing she'd see Marcus. They'd started getting coffee sometimes on weekends, sitting in the cheap diner down the street and talking for hours. He made her laugh with his dry sense of humor. She challenged him to dream bigger, to believe he deserved more than just surviving. "You should finish that degree," she told him one Saturday morning over pancakes. "You're smart enough for anything, Marcus. Don't let your past define your future." "Easy to say," he replied, but she could see he was considering it. "I'm serious. My brother David is in community college right now. I can help you look into programs, financial aid, scholarships. There are ways to make it work." Marcus stirred his coffee, silent for a long moment. "Why do you care so much?" he finally asked. About me, about all of this? Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner, Marcus. Everyone deserves to know they matter. And you do. You matter. She saw his eyes get shiny, saw him blink rapidly and look away. In that moment, Sarah understood just how starved for kindness this man had been his entire life. How little it took, just basic human decency and care to reach him. That's when Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She'd be his friend, his advocate, whatever he needed, not because she pitied him, but because she genuinely cared. Marcus was one of the best people she'd ever met, even if he couldn't see it himself. She had no way of knowing that her friendship would become his lifeline in the months ahead. She didn't know that the care and compassion she showed this lonely maintenance worker would end up changing not just his life, but the lives of countless others. All Sarah knew was that Marcus needed someone, and she was determined to be that person. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who refuses to walk away, who sees your worth when you can't see it yourself. As they left the diner that morning, walking into the sunshine of a new day, Sarah felt that familiar sense of purpose that had guided her entire life. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, and Marcus, walking beside her with something like hope beginning to bloom in his chest, was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could happen to him too. The pain in Marcus's knee had been getting progressively worse despite the treatment plan from the free clinic. He'd pushed through it for months, not wanting to bother anyone, but one morning he woke up and couldn't put weight on it at all. The joint was hot and swollen, and even the strongest painkillers weren't touching it. Sarah found him sitting on the steps of his apartment building, trying to figure out how he was going to get to work. She'd stopped by on her way to the hospital to drop off some meal prep containers, another one of her kindnesses that Marcus was learning to accept without protest. "That's it," she said, seeing him wince as he tried to stand. "You're coming with me to City General." No arguments. For once, Marcus didn't argue. The pain was too intense and he was scared. What if he damaged something permanently? What if he could never work again? The fear of losing his independence, of ending up helpless and dependent on others, terrified him more than any physical pain. At the hospital, Sarah pulled strings. She got Marcus seen quickly, got him into x-rays and an MRI, used her connections to bypass the usual bureaucratic delays. The orthopedic surgeon who examined him was blunt. Marcus needed surgery. The old injury had deteriorated, and without intervention he'd be looking at permanent disability. The price tag made Marcus's stomach drop. Even with the hospital's charity care program, even with payment plans, it was more money than he'd see in years. "We'll figure it out," Sarah said firmly, sitting beside him in the consultation room. "There are programs, assistance funds. I know people. We'll make this work, Marcus." Dr. Richardson, the surgeon, cleared his throat. "There's actually something else we need to discuss. For the surgery, we need current blood work full panel. Standard procedure." He paused, looking at his tablet. "But your records show you've never had comprehensive genetic screening. Given your unknown family history, I'd like to be thorough. There's also a research study our hospital is running on genetic markers for joint conditions. It's voluntary, but it might help us understand your case better and could benefit future patients." Marcus shrugged. "Whatever you need to do." He signed the consent forms without much thought. What did it matter? He had no family history to worry about, no relatives to compare genetics with. He was just trying to survive the next few weeks until surgery. The blood work was done that day. Marcus went home with stronger pain medication and strict instructions to stay off his feet. Sarah arranged for him to take medical leave from the center, personally spoke to Mr. Chen to make sure his job would be waiting for him. She even organized a meal train among the center's volunteers, ensuring Marcus wouldn't have to worry about cooking while he recovered. 3 weeks passed. Marcus was scheduled for surgery the following Monday. He was nervous but ready to get it over with. Sarah had been incredible, checking on him daily, helping him with physical therapy exercises, keeping his spirits up when the pain and frustration got to be too much. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, Marcus got a call from Dr. Richardson's office asking him to come in immediately, not for surgery prep, just to come in. The nurse on the phone sounded strange, excited almost, but wouldn't explain why. Sarah drove him to the hospital, sensing his anxiety. "It's probably nothing," she said, though she seemed uncertain too. Maybe they want to move up your surgery date. But when they arrived, they weren't taken to Dr. Richardson's office. Instead, they were escorted to a conference room where Dr. Richardson waited along with two other people Marcus didn't recognize, a woman in a business suit and a man who looked official and serious. "Mr. Reed," Dr. Richardson began, and his voice was shaking slightly. "I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking." Marcus felt Sarah's hand grip his as he sat. His heart was pounding. Was he dying? Had they found cancer in his blood work? "The genetic screening we did," Dr. Richardson continued. "It was entered into a national database as part of the research study. This database is used for various purposes, including helping families find missing relatives through DNA matching." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "Marcus, we got a hit. A familial match." The words didn't make sense at first. Marcus stared at the doctor, trying to process. "What do you mean, a match?" The woman in the suit leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a lawyer for the Reed family. 3 years ago, my client, Richard Reed, submitted his DNA to multiple databases hoping for a miracle. He lost his son 25 years ago in a car accident. The boy was 3 years old. His name was Marcus Reed." The room felt like it was spinning. Sarah's hand tightened on his. Marcus couldn't form words. "The DNA match is conclusive," Jennifer continued gently. "Richard Reed is your father, Marcus. You're his son. The son he thought died 25 years ago." The man Marcus hadn't been introduced to finally spoke. "I'm Detective Harris, retired now. I worked your case back then. The accident was catastrophic. Your mother died at the scene. You were thrown from the vehicle, found 50 yards away by a passing motorist. You were rushed to county hospital in critical condition. Somehow in the chaos, your identification was lost or misfiled. We searched for family, but nothing came up. Your father was in another hospital, also injured, and was told you died along with your mother. By the time he was well enough to ask questions, the investigation had concluded. Bodies had been buried. Records were sealed. Marcus felt like he was floating outside his body, watching this happen to someone else. "My father," he whispered. "I have a father?" "You have a father who has spent 25 years believing you were dead," Jennifer said, her eyes compassionate. "A father who blamed himself every day for not protecting you and your mother. When we called him with this news, he collapsed. He's in this hospital right now, actually. He insisted on coming the moment he heard, despite his doctor's concerns. He's been waiting to meet you. He's here." Marcus looked at Sarah, panic rising in his chest. "He's here right now?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "Breathe, Marcus. Just breathe. I'm right here with you. Do you want to meet him?" Jennifer asked. "I know this is overwhelming, but he's desperate to see you. We can wait if you need time, but he's really here?" Marcus interrupted. "My father is really here? He's in the waiting room down the hall. He's been there for 2 hours, too nervous to leave, hoping you'd agree to see him." Marcus stood on shaking legs. 28 years of wondering. 28 years of feeling abandoned, unwanted, alone. And all this time, somewhere out there, he had a father who thought he was dead, a father who'd been grieving him. "Yes," Marcus said. "I want to meet him. I need to meet him." They walked down the hallway, Sarah staying close beside him, Dr. Richardson and Jennifer leading the way. With each step, Marcus felt like he was moving toward something monumental, something that would divide his life into before and after. Jennifer opened a door to a private waiting room. Inside, standing by the window with his back to them, was a man with silver hair, expensive suit, shoulders shaking with emotion. "Richard," Jennifer said softly. "He's here. Marcus is here." The man turned around and Marcus saw his father's face for the first time in his memory. Richard Reed was in his 60s, tall and distinguished. But in that moment he looked broken and vulnerable. His eyes, the same gray-green as Marcus saw in the mirror every day, were red from crying. He took one look at Marcus and his face crumpled. "My son," he whispered. "My boy. My Marcus." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Marcus into his arms, sobbing openly. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed, before his own tears came. He grabbed onto this stranger who was his father and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. "I thought you were dead," Richard kept saying. "I thought I'd lost you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought no one wanted me." Marcus sobbed back. "I thought I was alone." They held each other, Two people torn apart by tragedy and reunited by chance, making up for 25 years of lost embraces. Sarah stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face, watching the miracle unfold. Finally, they pulled apart enough to look at each other. Richard cupped Marcus's face in his hands, studying every feature. "You look like your mother," he said, voice breaking. "So much like her. She'd be so happy to know you're alive. So happy." There were so many questions, so much to say, but in that moment words felt inadequate. Marcus had spent his entire life searching for where he belonged, and suddenly, impossibly, he'd found it. His father was alive. His father had been looking for him. His father wanted him. The lost boy had finally come home. The media storm hit within days. Someone at the hospital leaked the story, and suddenly Marcus Reed's face was everywhere. The lost heir to the Reed fortune, miraculously returned after 25 years. Reporters camped outside his apartment building, outside the community center, even outside Sarah's building once they figured out their connection. Richard Reed was one of the wealthiest men in the country, founder of Reed Technologies, a company worth billions. The story had everything the media loved: tragedy, mystery, a fairy tale reunion. They called Marcus the forgotten prince and the billionaire's lost son. Every news outlet wanted an interview. Social media exploded with theories and speculation. Marcus hated all of it. He'd moved into his father's estate for safety and privacy, but the mansion felt like a museum. 20,000 square feet of marble floors and priceless art. Staff members who called him Sir. A bedroom larger than his entire former apartment. It was overwhelming and disorienting. Richard tried so hard. He wanted to make up for lost time, to give Marcus everything he'd missed. New clothes, a new car, access to bank accounts with more money than Marcus had ever imagined. He introduced Marcus to his world: business meetings, charity galas, country club dinners. But it was too much, too fast. "I don't belong here," Marcus told Sarah one evening. She was one of the few people allowed past the security gates. She'd come over with takeout, finding Marcus hiding in the estate's library, the only room that felt remotely comfortable. "Give it time," Sarah said, unpacking containers of Thai food, his favorite. "This is a huge adjustment for everyone. You don't understand. These people—" Marcus gestured vaguely at the mansion around them. "They look at me and see dollar signs. Richard's business partners keep pulling me aside, trying to figure out what my angle is. His sister, my aunt apparently, keeps talking about family obligations and maintaining appearances. There are lawyers everywhere. All these documents about inheritance and trusts that I don't understand." "What about Richard?" Sarah asked. "How are things with your dad?" Marcus's expression softened. He's trying, really trying. But it's complicated." He looks at me and sees the 3-year-old he lost. I look at him and see a stranger who happens to share my DNA. We're both grieving people who never existed. He's mourning the child who never got to grow up in his care, and I'm mourning the father who never got to raise me. They ate in silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. "He seems like a good man, Marcus. Sad but good, he is. That's what makes this harder. He feels so guilty. He keeps apologizing for not finding me, even though none of this was his fault. And he's so desperate to connect, but we have nothing in common. He talks about business strategies and stock portfolios. I still can't wrap my head around not worrying about rent." The really hard part, Marcus admitted, was dealing with everyone else. Richard's sister, Patricia, barely hid her resentment about Marcus's sudden appearance affecting her children's inheritance. His business partners viewed Marcus as either a threat to the company or an opportunity to gain influence with Richard. And the distant relatives who'd never cared about Richard before were suddenly very interested in family. Then there were the people from Marcus's old life. Some were genuinely happy for him. Mr. Chen and Maria from the community center sent their love and support, but others revealed a bitter side. Former acquaintances came out of the woodwork with their hands out, claiming they'd always been such good friends. People he barely remembered gave interviews about knowing him when, making up stories for their 15 minutes of fame. "Money changes everything," Marcus said bitterly. "People I've never met act like they care about me, and people I thought I knew want something from me. I don't know who to trust anymore." "You can trust me," Sarah said quietly. "That hasn't changed and won't change." Marcus looked at her. Steady, constant Sarah who'd been helping him navigate this impossible situation without asking for anything in return. While everyone else had an agenda, Sarah just showed up with food and friendship. "I know," he said. "You're the only thing keeping me sane right now." The complications multiplied when some of Richard's extended family challenged Marcus's claim. Despite the DNA evidence, a few relatives contested his right to inheritance, hiring lawyers to find loopholes. They questioned whether Richard was mentally competent when he'd welcomed Marcus into his life. They suggested Marcus was a con artist who'd somehow faked the DNA results. Richard was furious, cutting ties with those family members and hiring the best legal team money could buy to protect Marcus's rights. But the betrayal hurt. These were people Richard had supported financially over the years, people he'd considered family. "This is what my money attracts," Richard told Marcus one night over dinner in the estate's formal dining room. "Greed and betrayal. I've learned to be suspicious of everyone's motives. It's a lonely way to live, son." "Then why live like this?" Marcus asked, gesturing at the opulence surrounding them. "What's the point of all this wealth if it just makes you miserable?" Richard set down his fork, considering the question. "For a long time, I didn't have a point. After I lost you and your mother, I threw myself into work because I didn't know what else to do. The company grew, the money accumulated, but I didn't care about any of it. I'd give every penny away if it meant having you both back." He paused. "But now you are back and I have a second chance. That changes everything." They were building something slowly. Richard started sharing stories about Marcus's mother, how they met, their courtship, the joy when Marcus was born. He showed Marcus old photo albums, videos of birthday parties and holidays. Marcus watched footage of himself as a toddler, this little boy he had no memory of being, playing with parents who looked so happy and in love. "She was beautiful," Marcus said, watching his mother laugh on the screen. "I wish I remembered her." "She loved you so much," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "We both did. We talked about your future, all the things we'd teach you, the person you'd become. If she could see you now, grown into such a good man despite everything, she'd be so proud." Those moments helped, but they were complicated by the reality that Marcus had grown into who he was because of his struggles, not in spite of them. The foster care system, the loneliness, the hardship, it had all shaped him. He couldn't pretend those years didn't matter just because he'd found his biological father. Sarah helped him process it all. She listened when he was frustrated, encouraged him when he doubted himself, and gently challenged him when he was being unfair to Richard or himself. "Your dad made a mistake today," she said one evening after Marcus had vented about Richard trying to enroll him in business school without asking first. But his heart was in the right place. "Maybe tell him directly that you need him to ask before making decisions about your life." "I shouldn't have to tell him that," Marcus protested. "No, you shouldn't. But he's learning too, Marcus. He's trying to be a father to an adult son he doesn't know. That's not an easy position either. Cut him some slack but also set boundaries. You can do both." Richard noticed Sarah's influence on Marcus and was grateful for it. He invited her to family dinners, thanked her profusely for being there for his son. But he also saw something deeper. The way Marcus's whole demeanor changed when Sarah was around. How he relaxed, laughed more easily, seemed more like himself. "She's special," Richard commented one day after Sarah had left. "That nurse of yours. She's my friend," Marcus said. But even he heard how his voice changed when he talked about her. "She's more than that to you," Richard observed. "And she doesn't want anything from you. Do you know how rare that is? Someone who knew you when you had nothing and treats you exactly the same now that you have everything." Marcus did know. Sarah was the one constant in a life that had been turned completely upside down. She'd seen him at his lowest and never judged. She celebrated his reunion with Richard while understanding his conflicted feelings about it. She was the bridge between his old life and his new one. But accepting Richard's world meant confronting some hard truths. Marcus's idealized image of what having a family would be like didn't match the complicated reality. Having a father didn't magically heal his childhood wounds. Money solved some problems but created new ones. And being part of the Reed family meant accepting that some people would always see him as an outsider or a threat. The question Marcus kept coming back to was, what now? Richard wanted him to join the company, to learn the business and eventually take over. It's what Richard had always planned for his son. But Marcus had his own dreams, modest as they were. He'd wanted to finish his degree, maybe work in community development, help people like himself who'd fallen through the cracks. Could he do both? Could he honor his father's hopes while staying true to himself? And more importantly, could he figure out how to be Richard Reed's son while still being Marcus Reed, the person he'd become through years of struggle and survival? These were the questions that kept him up at night, staring at the ceiling of his luxurious bedroom, feeling more lost than when he'd been sleeping in his car years ago. At least then, he'd known who he was. Now he wasn't sure anymore, and that uncertainty was the most frightening thing of all. 6 months after the reunion, Marcus stood in front of a room full of reporters, lawyers and board members, feeling his heart pound against his ribs. Richard sat beside him, looking proud and nervous in equal measure. This press conference would change everything. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. "6 months ago, I learned that I wasn't alone in the world after all. I found my father and he found me. It's been the most overwhelming, confusing, and beautiful experience of my life." He glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "But reuniting with my father also opened my eyes to something I couldn't ignore. I spent 25 years in a system that failed me, failed thousands of kids like me. I aged out of foster care believing I had no family, no future, no worth. That should never happen to any child." Marcus took a breath. "My father and I have spent the last few months talking about how we can honor both the past and the future. Today, we're announcing the creation of the Reed Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to reforming foster care, supporting community centers, and funding healthcare access for underserved populations." The room erupted with questions, but Marcus kept going. "We're starting with a $50 million commitment. The foundation will work to improve foster care record keeping, provide resources for aging out youth, fund educational scholarships, and support community health initiatives. And I'll be serving as the foundation's director." After the press conference, Richard pulled Marcus aside. "You did great, son. Your mother would be so proud." "I couldn't have done this without you," Marcus said, "or without Sarah." Sarah had helped Marcus find this path. During one of their late-night conversations, she'd asked him a simple question. "What do you wish someone had done for you when you were in the system?" That question opened the floodgates. Marcus realized he didn't have to choose between honoring his father and honoring his past. He could do both. The foundation became that bridge, using Reed wealth to fix the systems that had broken him, giving other kids the support he'd never had. Richard embraced the idea wholeheartedly. For years he'd been pouring money into his company, while his personal life remained empty. The foundation gave him purpose beyond business, a way to transform his grief into something meaningful. "I spent 25 years living with guilt," Richard told Marcus as they set up the foundation's first office. "Guilt that I survived when your mother didn't. Guilt that I couldn't protect you. Guilt that I didn't search harder. This work, it helps. It doesn't erase what happened, but it gives meaning to the pain." They hired staff who understood the systems they were trying to change: former foster youth, social workers, community organizers. Sarah came on board as the foundation's director of healthcare initiatives, finally able to help people on the scale she'd always dreamed of. The foundation's first major project was partnering with Lincoln Community Center, the place where Marcus and Sarah had met, to build a comprehensive support hub for at-risk families. They renovated the facility, added a free health clinic, expanded youth programs, and created a resource center for foster families. On opening day, Marcus stood in the same hallway where he used to push a mop bucket, looking at children playing in the brand-new recreation room. Mr. Chen walked up beside him, tears in his eyes. "You did this," Mr. Chen said. "You remembered where you came from." "I couldn't forget if I tried," Marcus replied. "This place saved me. The people here treated me like I mattered when I didn't believe I did." Maria, the former receptionist, now managed the foundation's volunteer program. She'd taken Marcus aside earlier and said, "I always knew you were special. I just didn't know you were a secret billionaire." "I'm not," Marcus had laughed. "I'm still just Marcus. I just have more resources now to help people." But the truth was more complicated. Marcus was still figuring out who he was in this new reality. He lived in the estate with Richard but kept his old studio apartment, needing a place that felt like his own. He wore expensive clothes to foundation events but still felt most comfortable in jeans and a t-shirt. He was learning about his father's business but stayed actively involved in the hands-on work of the foundation. Richard supported all of it, even when board members questioned whether Marcus should be wasting his time on social work instead of focusing on the family business. "My son is doing more important work than I ever did," Richard told them firmly. "If you can't see that, that's your limitation, not his." The relationship between father and son continued to evolve. They had dinner together most evenings, Richard slowly learning who Marcus really was and Marcus gradually understanding the man Richard had become. They'd never get back the years they lost, but they were building something new. "Do you ever wonder who you'd have been if the accident never happened?" Richard asked one night. Marcus considered it. "Sometimes. But I think I'd rather focus on who I am now. I wouldn't wish my childhood on anyone. But it made me care about people who are suffering. It gave me perspective. Maybe that's worth something." "It's worth everything," Richard said quietly. "I raised you to be compassionate even though I wasn't there to do it. Somehow, despite everything, you became exactly the kind of man I'd hoped you'd be." Sarah witnessed the transformation in both of them. Richard, who'd been going through the motions of life for decades, had found purpose again. Marcus, who'd spent years believing he wasn't worthy of love, was learning to accept that he was wanted. One evening, as Sarah and Marcus walked through the renovated community center, he stopped in front of a wall where they'd hung photos from the center's history. There was one of him from years ago, mopping floors, looking tired and alone. "That feels like a different lifetime," Marcus said. "It was only 2 years ago," Sarah reminded him. "I know, but I was a different person then. I thought I knew who I was, just some guy who got dealt a bad hand making the best of it. Now I'm—" He trailed off. "Now you're still that guy," Sarah said firmly. "You just have more resources. The money didn't change who you are, Marcus. It changed what you can do." There's a difference. She was right. Marcus was still the person who stopped to help someone struggling, who remembered what it felt like to be invisible, who understood that small kindnesses could save someone's life. The difference was now he could operate on a larger scale. The foundation's work grew. They opened 3 more community health centers in the first year. They funded a program to provide legal support for foster youth. They created emergency housing for young adults aging out of the system. They partnered with schools to ensure foster children had access to tutoring and mental health services. Every initiative was personal. Every program addressed something Marcus had needed and never received. He poured his heart into the work, driven by the memory of that boy who'd felt so alone and forgotten. Richard watched his son with admiration and some sadness. "I missed your childhood," he told Marcus one day. "I'll never stop grieving that. But I get to witness who you've become, and that's a gift I never thought I'd have." "I'm glad we found each other," Marcus said. It was simple but true. 1 year after their reunion, the foundation held its first fundraising gala. Marcus gave a speech, no longer nervous about public speaking. He told his story, not to gain sympathy, but to shine a light on a broken system. He introduced Sarah, calling her the person who saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Sarah, who was blushing furiously at her table, "represents what we're all capable of. She didn't have wealth or power, but she had compassion. She paid for my medical care out of her own pocket. She gave her time freely. She treated me with dignity when I felt worthless. That's the real work we're trying to support. Not just throwing money at problems, but connecting humans to humans, showing people they matter." The gala raised $12 million. Donors lined up to support the foundation's mission. But Marcus was most proud of the foster youth in attendance. Kids the foundation was already helping. Young people who'd never been to anything like this, who were seeing that someone cared about their futures. After the event, Marcus, Richard, and Sarah stood on the estate's balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Your mother and I used to stand here and dream about your future," Richard said softly. "We imagined all sorts of things, what you'd become, who you'd love, what mark you'd leave on the world. But this exceeds anything we could have imagined." "I had help," Marcus said, looking at Sarah. "A lot of help," Sarah smiled. "You would have found your way regardless. I just happened to be there when you needed a friend." "You were more than a friend," Marcus said. "You were the first person who made me believe I deserved good things. You changed my life before I ever found out about my father." Richard cleared his throat. I think I'll head inside, give you two some privacy. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder as he passed. I'm proud of you, son. Not because of your success with the foundation, but because of who you are. You're a good man. Alone on the balcony, Marcus and Sarah stood in comfortable silence. They'd been through so much together. This nurse and the maintenance worker who became something more. Thank you, Marcus said finally. For everything. For seeing me. For caring. For never giving up on me. That's what people do for each other, Sarah replied. We show up, we care. We help carry each other's burdens. That's not extraordinary, Marcus. That's just being human. Maybe, Marcus said, but you're still the best human I know. Looking back, Marcus understood that fate hadn't just brought him to his biological father. It had brought him to Sarah first, the kindest soul alive who'd shown him he had worth before he ever knew about his family or his inheritance. She'd saved him in the ways that mattered most. The money would help thousands of people through the foundation. But Sarah's compassion had helped one lonely maintenance worker believe he mattered. And that small act of kindness had rippled outward, changing not just Marcus's life but the lives of everyone the foundation would touch. Sometimes that's how healing works. One person decides another person is worth caring about. One person refuses to walk away. One person offers a hand not because they have to but because they choose to. Marcus had been lost his entire life. Lost in the system, lost to his father, lost to himself. But he'd been found by the people who mattered. And now he was dedicating his life to making sure other lost children would be found too. As they stood together under the stars, Marcus felt something he'd spent 28 years searching for, the simple, profound sense that he belonged. Not because of his name or his wealth, but because he'd found people who truly saw him and chose to love him anyway. His father had given him family. Sarah had given him hope. And together, they were building a future where no child would ever feel as alone as Marcus once had. That was worth more than any inheritance. That was everything.